By definition, an indie game is described as a game developed by a smaller studio without the financial and technical support of a larger publisher. There are plenty of games, especially recently, that fall under the indie game category. However, there are not many that could easily pass as a AAA game. Passing as a AAA game is tough, as the developers need to create a game with a smaller budget while also making it have high production value. Whether this be through the game's graphics, immersive worlds, incredible set pieces, or in-depth game mechanics, it's possible for indie games to appear AAA. Sometimes indie games release that can rival what the big corporations are putting out these days. This list showcases 10 indie games that could pass as AAA games. Each of these games are so expertly made that it's hard to think that they didn't have a massive team behind its creation. Indie games have seriously improved over the past few years, and all the picks on this list easily prove that fact.
Most players don't know that Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is an indie game, but it falls into the category since it's fully developed and published by Ninja Theory. However, the game can easily pass as an AAA game due to the incredible cinematics and presentation on display from start to finish. There are times throughout a playthrough of this game where you will forget you're playing a video game and instead think you are watching a movie. That's how unbelievably realistic the game looks in its cutscenes and set pieces. It's not only the graphics that make it feel like a AAA game, but also the deep story and emotional topics that it discusses, with superb writing and top-notch voice acting. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice focuses on sensitive topics of mental illness, something that is risky to talk about, especially when you're not as well known as major studios out there, and yet the game did pretty well for itself, selling over 1 million copies a year after release, and doing well enough to warrant a sequel.
Not only does an indie game claim the best Metroidvania in the industry with Silksong, but another indie also claims the best roguelike with Hades. Developed and published by Supercat Games, Hades has a once-in-a-lifetime game that is everything a AAA game will offer to players. It has a high production value, a deep and engaging story, complex game mechanics, and flawless performance throughout. Seriously, the performance is buttery smooth, with almost no hiccups in gameplay. It simply feels like a AAA game, and for the longest time I thought it was. Similar to how Hollow Knight Silksong beats out Metroidvanias made by big companies, Hades puts others to shame in the roguelike genre. Deathloop, Returnal, God of War Ragnarok's Valhalla node, all made by AAA developers, can't compete with the masterpiece that is Hades. This game is the epitome of an indie studio brimming with talent.
Disco Elysium feels like a AAA game, despite being developed by an indie studio, Zaum. Every element of this RPG, from its unique painted art style and layered soundtrack to its attention to detail and polish in its gameplay systems, is typically what you would find from studios with big budgets. There are plenty of reasons why this game was nominated for Best Indie, but the main reason is due to the amount of freedom the player has. It's a true role-playing game. Disco Elysium is a prime example of an indie studio caring about its player base, as it's easy to tell they poured their heart into the game. It's not only a game that can pass as a AAA title, but it's also one that surpasses around 90% of everything else out there these days. Disco Elysium is a must-play for any RPG fan, and I can't wait to see how Zaum's next game turns out. But I have full confidence that it's going to be fantastic.
Clair Obscur Expedition 3-3 is one of the best turn-based RPGs of our time, with a heartfelt story, complex combat system, and beautiful graphics. To many, it was a surprise to hear that the studio behind this incredible project, Sandfall Interactive, only has around 33 developers. Even more surprising was the fact that Clair Obscur Expedition 3-3 is the developer's first game ever. Sandfall Interactive has really given AAA developers a run for their money, as they proved that you don't need to spend an insane amount of money to create a game that looks and feels high value. Clair Obscur Expedition 3-3 feels like a big budget project, but this indie studio was able to put it together with less than $30 million. That's a really impressive amount in the video game industry.
But what's even more impressive is that Clair Obscur is better than 90% of AAA games out there.
Black Myth Wukong is considered an indie game by definition, but it sure doesn't seem like one. Developed and published by Game Science, Black Myth Wukong made a splash among the gaming community, reaching a Steam peak of nearly 2.5 million players. Not only is the combat system phenomenal, but the boss design is such a standout that it can rival AAA games in the genre. It's a shocker to see this game come from an indie studio who only produced mobile games in the past. Other aspects of Black Myth Wukong can go toe-to-toe with AAA developers in the industry. It has beautiful graphics, complex RPG systems, and a main story that can take the average player around 50 hours to complete. No one in their right mind would look at Black Myth Wukong and think to themselves, yeah, this is an indie game. No, you instantly think it's an AAA game just because of how impressive it is all around.
The Stanley Parable, developed by indie developers Davey Redden and William Prode, is a comedic adventure that feels as if it was created by a AAA studio. While it doesn't necessarily have the graphics to match the bigger names in the industry, the number of choices players can make and possible different outcomes that can occur is downright impressive. Each playthrough can be different, with unique dialogue, situations, and endings, making each run feel fresh compared to the last. To play this game and realize it was made by only 2 developers, I was shocked. Rarely are there indie games that provide players with so many different ways to play, making the Stanley Parable stand out among the greats. Even some AAA developers struggle with this type of gameplay, and if they do succeed, we never really see it go as far as this one. Besides the complex gameplay with branching storylines, the voice acting of the narrator is also fantastic and can compete with well-known actors in the industry. Surprisingly, the game only costs around $11,000, but it just sure doesn't feel that way.
Sword of the Sea is an indie game developed and published by Giant Squid, a small team composed of only around 7 developers. Giant Squid was formed by Matt Nava, the art director of other indie hits such as Flower and Journey. Sword of the Sea takes a lot of inspiration from those 2 games, as it's all about beautiful environments and fluid gameplay. Additionally, this game has some of the most relaxing music you'll ever hear in the gaming industry. All of those aspects mentioned make Sword of the Sea a standout game of 2025. Even though it's a really short game, only lasting around 4 hours, Sword of the Sea is executed so well that it can easily pass as a AAA game. Its gameplay feels incredible as you surf across various landscapes on a sword, and it easily brings you back to simpler times when games were meant to bring pure joy. Sword of the Sea is a stunner and deserves a spot on this list. Developed by Blue 12 Studio, Stray has players take on the role of a cat on a journey to return to the surface from which it fell. What seems like a simple premise soon turns into an engrossing and emotional story that will stay with you after it ends. Stray is so good that it was nominated for Indie Game of the Year at the 2022 Game of the Year Awards. This isn't surprising considering how great the game is, but it was surprising at the time to find out that Stray is in fact an indie game. It has AAA production value and could easily pass as such. It simply feels like it had a big budget behind it, and even though the official amount to make it hasn't been fully disclosed, it's safe to say it wasn't a lot, considering it launched at only $30. The environments are top-notch, the level design is smart and creative, and its immersiveness reaches the level that you commonly see from big developers. Stray is a game that you don't want to miss out on, so if you haven't played, I recommend doing that as soon as possible.
Kenna Bridge of Spirits, developed by indie studio Ember Lab, uses classic 3D action-adventure and platforming in one package, reminiscent of Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank. These games were created by big-time developers, Naughty Dog and Insomniac Games respectively, but Kenna Bridge of Spirits does a great job at replicating them while bringing its own unique gameplay to the genre. It feels like it could pass as a AAA game due to the beautiful graphics, incredible music, and its overall polish. When I played through Kenna Bridge of Spirits back when it released in 2021, I was overcome with tons of memories of my childhood when games were simpler and just a joy to play through.
Emberlove has created a game of the past that feels like it fits right at home in modern times. I would love to see Emberlove continue making games of this nature, because Kenna Bridge of Spirits feels like an AAA game while also bringing you back to the classics that we grew up with.
Team Cherry came out of nowhere with their release of the first Hollow Knight in 2017, and while it felt more than just an indie game, it still had that feel to it in certain aspects. However, with the recent release of its sequel, Hollow Knight Silksong, it's easy to become confused and think that Team Cherry is a AAA developer. While not confirmed, it seems that the sequel had a bigger budget and it shows in the higher production value. Hollow Knight Silksong is simply one of the best Metroidvanias on the market right now, beating out AAA competitors such as Ubisoft's Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, Nintendo and Mercury Steam's Metroid Dread, and even Xbox Game Studios and Moon Studios' Ori and the Will of the Wisps. While those mentioned are fantastic games, Silksong was developed and published only by Team Cherry, and it is leagues above them.